Welcome back to the channel, and in this video we will have the AFC East draft grades, and as you can see on the screen, every team's draft will be split up into a grade, and this is the tiers that they will fall in. I will also be grading each individual pick with those 5 color-coded systems to determine how good I think each pick was, gray being the rarest and very few picks got the gray disastrous pick, red being a pick I do not like, white being a neutral pick where most of the picks will obviously fall into, green meaning I like the pick a lot, and gold being an amazing, perfect value or perfect pick in general. And on top of that, on the screen, it will not only see where they rank within the division and their grade overall, it's where they ranked within the entire league of the 32 teams. So each draft class ranked, every pick graded, and let's get into it with our first team in the AFC East. Coming in at number 4 in the AFC East and the number 25 class overall, it is the New England Patriots. And the best way I can describe this draft class is task failed successfully, because you got Drake Maye at number 3 overall, and that is a home run. I very much am a believer in Drake Maye. He was my quarterback number 2 and a top 10 prospect overall. I'm one of those people who very much thinks Drake Maye was the clear-cut number 2 QB in this class, so I can't knock them in the slightest for this pick, obviously. And really, the rest of the class in some ways is irrelevant when you get a quarterback this high, because if the quarterback hits, well, you're doing something right and you have everything going for you. You just need to surround him with talent. My problem is, I don't think the Patriots did a good job everywhere else surrounding him with the talent that he needs. I really think the Patriots had the right idea of what they should be doing. I just think they picked the absolute wrong players. So this one purely just comes down to what you think the guys that they got in day 2 and 3 are. But for me, I'm kind of puzzled by Jalen Polk with a top 40 pick. For me, while I like Jalen Polk, I had him as a round 3 to 4 player who was 91st on my board. So picking him that high is, for me, an insane reach when there were so many better receivers on the board. And you have Adonai Mitchell on the board, you had Lad McConkey on the board, you had so many just players that I had infinitely higher grades on, and I really don't understand going with Polk, who I feel like is a really nice role player and piece of an offense, but like, I hope they don't have him in there expecting him to be a number 1. And I'm looking at the receiving core right now. We know the Patriots for years have had a weak receiving core, but Kendrick Bourne, Demario Douglas, Jalen Polk, Juju Smith-Schuster, KJ Osborne, Tyquan Thornton, Jalen Reagor, and 4th round pick Javon Baker, who I did like, and we'll get to him in a second. But it's just a bunch of guys, and you can't fully do just a committee at receiver nowadays. You could do a committee at running back. You can have just a bunch of guys at a bunch of different positions, but at the receiver spot, you need to have a go-to. You need to have a number 1. You can't just build out with a bunch of role players. And you can do that if you have Patrick Mahomes. That's what the Chiefs have done. But Drake Maye, I don't think, is going to be Patrick Mahomes. And it's really hard when you have a young quarterback and you just have a revolving door of just guys rotating in and out at receiver. And for me, I don't think Jalen Polk's going to emerge as a number 1. I don't think even really he's going to be a strong number 2 in the league. He feels to me more like a number 3. So drafting a high-end 3, a low-end 2 in the 2nd round, I think is a massive reach. And then you go Caden Wallace in the 3rd round. And again, I like the idea. Go with the tackle, protect your quarterback, and get someone on the other side of Michael Owenu. But Caden Wallace, again, like, right process, wrong player for me. They did a lot to try to give Drake Maye a situation where he could potentially succeed. You see wide receiver, tackle, guard, receiver, tight end. Good processing. Again, I just don't think you went with the best players. Now, I do like Javon Baker in the 4th round. I think he's going to be able to fill that role that Devontae Parker was initially going to fill when they first signed him, and Devontae Parker has been atrocious. Now he's gone. I think Baker's going to be a much better version of what they originally wanted. And the thing that's funny about this is I had Baker and Polk very close together. Like I said, I had Polk as my 91st player. I had Javon Baker at 94. So Javon Baker, I think, was a nice value pick. And then Jalen Polk, I don't think you got that much better of a player, yet you took him 2 rounds higher. I don't. That's where my issue with the Polk pick comes in. Him on his own, isolated, isn't bad if you got him in maybe mid to late 3rd round at best. But Baker is around where I had Polk going, and I like the Javon Baker pick. I like the value there. Then you go into the 6th round with a cornerback, the only defensive player that they took. So heavy on offense, like I said. They go Joe Milton in the 6th round, which is interesting. There's a lot of word of Joe Milton potentially being able to play tight end, and we'll see if he eventually makes the move there. A lot of quarterbacks his size and his caliber have made that move to tight end. If he wants to stick at quarterback, he's going to come in, be that Logan Thomas, Cardale Jones, just really strong arm, and that's about it. I don't really foresee him doing much of anything as a quarterback, but if I were betting on, a guy like him or Jordan Travis or Sam Hartman or any of these 6th round to undrafted quarterbacks to maybe develop into something, Milton has some tools, so I'm fine with it, but there's a good chance he moves to tight end. Speaking of tight end, they go and grab Jaheim Bell in the 7th round, and I'm a big fan of this pick. Jaheim Bell was actually in my top 10 tight ends list pretty comfortably and was a 118th ranked player for me, as I do like what Bell is able to provide. He is undersized, of course, but I do think he is an incredible value in the 7th round. And for a team that lost Mike Gesicki, still has Hunter Henry, brought in Austin Hooper, Bell provides them with a bit more of athleticism at the tight end position rather than just the generic kind of possession-y 3rd down target chain mover types. So Bell provides them maybe some of what Jonnu Smith originally was supposed to provide them early on. I think overall, this is a odd draft for the Patriots, because if you like Caden Wallace and you like Jalen Polk, I bet you have this draft class ranked a lot higher. And if you're only looking at the process of the players that they targeted, like position-wise, you might again think this is a really highly rated draft class. For me, I'm going to be critical of them taking Polk and Wallace that high. I'm obviously going to give them an applause for taking Drake Maye, because I think that was a slam dunk pick. And Javon Baker and Jaheim Bell I thought were really good values in day 3. Things get a little interesting here with the number 3 team in the AFC East, and that is the Miami Dolphins, who have a really odd class in my opinion. And the immediate thing that's going to stick out is Chop Robinson getting a gray pick, a disaster pick that I absolutely hated. And I'm just not a Chop Robinson guy. For me, he ranked 64th on my board overall, and I just did not really see why you should be taking him in the 1st round. I understand the tools and the freaky athleticism, but this is not a Micah Parsons situation. This is not a guy out of Penn State who's a freaky athlete who's going to be able to come into the NFL and, if used properly, is going to be some high-tier, crazy upside defender. For me, he is an abysmal run defender and is an absolute liability in run defense to the point where you shouldn't even be playing him. And then as a pass rusher, yes, he is a bolt of lightning off the edge. If he cannot get wrapped up by a lineman, he doesn't have great pass rush maneuvers. He is just pure speed off the edge. And if you're banking on just the speed to get in, I think you're going to be left a little disappointed. And it's not just that. I'm looking at the defense of the Miami Dolphins, and yes, Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb had injury concerns and got hurt last year, and you're thinking, man, we can really use an edge rusher to potentially not be in a situation like we were last year where we lost our edge rushers. Andrew Van Ginkel, he left in free agency. We don't have, the depth, and we need someone maybe to potentially start the season, because who knows what percentage both those guys will be at to start the season. For me, that's not what you spend your 1st round pick at, because I'm looking at a bigger, more glaring hole in their defense, and that is the loss of Christian Wilkins. You lose Christian Wilkins, And right now, your projected starters are Zach Sealer, Tahir Tart, and Neville Gallimore. And Benito Jones as your rotation with Deshaun Hand. I'm looking at the board and I'm saying you had Jerzon Newton there. That would have been an incredible value for them to pick him at number 21. I'm looking at cornerback where you lost Xavier Howard, picked up Kendall Fuller and Jalen Ramsey. Both Fuller and Ramsey are getting up there in age. You could have used an outside corner and you had your choice of corners on the board. You could have went with Quinyon Mitchell. You could have went with Nate Wiggins and you didn't do that. I'm concerned that they just went with Chot Robinson purely off the upside. And I don't think this is a move that helps move their team forward right now. For me, 21 was too high to take Chop, and I amplify that even more by just how many defensive players were on the board at the time that they picked. Like I said in the last video, and it's something that was made very much aware on the draft coverage, 14 straight offensive players to start the draft. You had your choice at any of the corners. You had any interior D lineman not named Byron Murphy. You had the edges not named Latu and Verse. And you go Chop Robinson. It's just, I don't see it, and I don't like the pick in the slightest. But if you take away their first round pick, I liked what they did everywhere else, and that's what's frustrating about this, because if you go and take Quinyon Mitchell, you take even Cooper DeJean, you take Jerzon Newton, you take any of these other defenders, I'm shooting them up to potentially a top 10 draft. And I see Patrick Paul in the second round. I think that's a great spot for Patrick Paul because he is not a day one ready plug and play type player. He is a contingency long-term plan for when Teron Armstead eventually leaves. We don't know if Armstead's going to be playing his last year of football this year. He was considering retirement, so don't be surprised if Armstead's out next year. Patrick Paul comes in. He's going to get a year to learn, and Armstead also never plays the full season, so you're going to need him to potentially fill in for like 4 games. I think that's a good use of your second round pick. And you go Jalen Wright in the 4th round. This one I don't really understand too much. I'm not a big Jalen Wright guy. I don't really like his vision and where he projects coming from that Tennessee offense. The Tennessee offense is really weird, and I don't like how any of their players really project in the NFL. On top of that, like, you gave up assets to trade up for him. That's a confusing one to me. I don't hate it. I don't love it. It's just kind of a their pick, but you know these Shanahan-style offenses love just picking running backs in the 3rd and 4th round, so I just have come to expect it with these types of teams. But let's talk about their 5th and 6th rounds, as I think they hit absolute home runs in those rounds. And we will start with Muhammad Kamara, a player that I absolutely loved, and I love this pick so very much, as really I didn't have that big of a gap between Chop and Kamara. I said Chop was about 64, 65 for me on my big board. Kamara was, I think, 71. I had them very much close to each other, and it just goes to show not only was I low on Chop, but I'm high on Kamara. And if you would have just sit there in the 1st round, taken a DB, a D lineman, even an offensive line, just something else, and came out of this draft with just Kamara at the edge rusher position, I think that's more than enough for being your 3rd edge rusher to replace Van Ginkel and then potentially step in whenever you need him in pass rushing situations. But I really do believe in the upside in Muhammad Kamara, and I think that it's a really great pick for them. I think it's one of the best value picks in the entire draft, and I'm not going to be surprised in the slightest if Kamara turns out to be the better player than Chop long term. And then to make things even better, in the 6th round, you go and get Malik Washington, who is one of my absolute favorite players in this draft in terms of like a day 3 sleeper type. I had a round 3 grade on him, and I was such a big fan of his. And, you know, in the teams that I was rooting for him to get drafted not only high, but to a team that I was a big fan of. And of course, he lands in Miami, a team that I enjoy watching, and I think he's going to be a great piece for this team. Washington was my 61st rated player and my 12th wide receiver overall, so it's incredible value. I love what he brings to the table. Led the ACC in yards last year, and I know there was concern because, you know, final year breakouts at wide receiver are a bit of a red flag, and I do agree. I'm not big on, you know, 1-year wonders, but I think his situation is different. There is a whole thing on his situation on why he was a year 5 breakout, but I really, really love the pick, and getting him at 184th overall, I think he's immediately going to slot in and be their number 3 receiver behind Hill and Waddle, and I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a lot of manufactured touches and is an absolute just underrated star in that offense. And then finally in the 6th and 7th round, you take a safety, and then you go Taj Washington. Honestly, those guys are just pretty whatever. Washington will probably make the team as the receiver depth for Miami was pretty lacking, which is another reason why I absolutely love the Malik Washington pick. But I mean, he's gonna have to fight with River Craycraft and Braxton Berrios for touches at the receiver position. I don't think it's going to be an uphill battle for Washington, either one of them, to not only just make the team but get offensive playing snaps. As I really like what the Dolphins did everywhere outside the first round. It's just, Chop Robinson's just the pick I can't get behind, and I understand if you love the upside, but for me, I just don't see it happening. Coming in at number 2 for the AFC East in the number 18 overall draft, we have the New York Jets, who a lot of people are a little unhappy with what they did in the first round, and I'm gonna be honest, I stand by and say the Jets made the absolute right decision. A lot of people were sitting there saying they need to take Brock Bowers, and I'm gonna be honest, I made the mistake of kind of leading myself to believe that that's what they would do, and I switched my mock draft like last minute to take Bowers at number 10. But man, I think Olu was the right pick, and I will 100% stand by that. The issue for the Jets last year has been pass protection, and I know a lot of people are immediately going to point to and say, they got Tyron Smith, they got Morgan Moses. You don't need a tackle, and if you're all in for this year, you should be taking, someone like a Brock Bowers. And while I get it, I also say there's no shot Trent Williams, for one, is playing the entire season. He never does nowadays. 2, Morgan Moses isn't that amazing. I mean, he's a fine player, but Olu can play right tackle day 1 and he'll be better than Morgan Moses. And 3, you do have to have some sort of long-term plan. Tyron isn't going to be around for a very long time. I'd give it max 2 years and he'll be gone. So I say this team has struggled with pass protection for so many years, and it's made it hard for any quarterback that they bring in to have any sort of success. So go with a bit more of a long-term solution and get yourself a solidified pass-protecting left tackle, by far the best pass-protecting tackle in this draft, and one of the best pure pass protectors coming out in a long time. So I think that is more than a valid decision to make, not just for the current, but for the future of this team. The problem was pass protection. Tyron Smith and Olu being your tackles in year 1, even if Olu's a bit out of position, or if he has to, move around the offensive line a little bit because Tyron inevitably is going to get hurt. It's fine. It's maybe not as impactful year 1 as Brock Bowers, but long term, it is the much better play. And then you go into the 3rd round. They didn't have a number 2 pick, so you go and take Malachi Corley, and I don't have him as highly of a rated receiver as I do other players that were taken below him, but also he's not exactly a full wide receiver. He's just more a player, a gadget, a weapon. So I like the explosiveness added to the offense that I think really needed it, because Garrett Wilson I think is an incredible receiver, but he's not some dynamic playmaker. You put the ball in his hands and he makes guys miss. And Mike Williams is going to be a nice deep threat and a bigger body player. And you have Alan Lazard and Jarvis Brownlee. I think you really use a guy like Malachi Corley in the slot. He's the guy you get the bubbles, the screens, the jet sweeps, the pop passes all out to. I think he could really fill a role, someone that Aaron Rodgers is used to having, like a Randall Cobb. Remember when in Green Bay, Randall Cobb would take not only all those little passes, but they'd line Randall Cobb up in the backfield a number of times. I think you can do that with Malachi Corley. It gives them a level of explosiveness that I think they desperately needed, as their only home run hitter was Breece Hall. And then we move down to the 4th round. They take Braylon Allen, and I really like this pick for the Jets, as I think this is, again, another like subtle need that they had, because aside from Breece Hall, the number 2 running back slot was abysmal, as they only have Isaiah Davis and Israel Abanikanda, who they drafted last year. But getting a nice physical power back like, Braylon Allen, and again, someone that Aaron Rodgers is used to playing with, comping him to a guy like A.J. Dillon, who's just a big tank running back. I think he's going to be better than A.J. Dillon long term, because I think A.J. Dillon has been a lot of a really underwhelming player in the NFL. But I think Braylon Allen, the only issue I have with this pick is Allen's going to be a guy who they use in these late game situations to, grind out the clock and power the football. He has 9 fumbles in his college career. That needs to be cleaned up immediately, because if he's going to be on a team that presumably is a contending team, he needs to clean up those fumbles and he can get those late game carries. But if he can clean up the fumbles and be fine, I think it's going to be a great fit for them, and he's going to get a good amount of like workload, goal line, short yardage touches. I think it's a really nice pick. Then they go in the rest of day 3, Jordan Travis. Fine, I'm not a big Jordan Travis fan. I really did not enjoy watching him at Florida State, because I'm just sitting there trying to watch all these other players like Trey Benson, Johnny Wilson, Keon Coleman, and I'm just watching Jordan Travis sail the ball 10 yards over their head, and it was really hard to get a good evaluation on some of these players in the pass catching game. I don't think Jordan Travis is going to be anything special, but obviously 3rd string quarterback, it's not going to be that big of a deal. I spoke of Isaiah Davis. I mean, it's a fine pick. You didn't want him being your number 2 or number 3 running back, though, so getting Braylon Allen is nice. They go Quantez Stiggers in the 5th round. He was the CFL player who has a really interesting story, so I don't know enough about him to really give a proper grade, because obviously getting access to Canadian football tape and all that other stuff isn't as easy. I mean, you can look at his highlights, I guess, but I mean, that's not going to give you the full scope of how he is as a player. I think it's a really interesting dart throw at the 5th round to take a player like him, though, and obviously secondary isn't some dire need right now in the cornerback room when you have Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed, so you can bring him along slowly. And then you get Jalen Key in the 7th round. I think they did need a safety. They could have addressed that maybe a little earlier than the 7th round, but fine overall. I think this is a very solid overall draft from the Jets. It graded middle of the pack, and I think it's that checks out as a middle of the pack draft. Really decent job from the Jets, and I think with a strong roster, they have every chance to be a contending team this year in the AFC. And finally, we have the Buffalo Bills coming in at number 11 overall and the number 1 team in the AFC East for draft class. I put them at an 83 overall score, and I think they did a pretty nice job with what they had, as I know a lot of people have been bashing them for the trades that they made, and I obviously don't love trading with the Kansas City Chiefs, but like, they needed picks. I really felt like this was a team that needed just quantity. They needed players, they needed stuff, as the Bills have been in a retool this past year, as they have traded, Stephon Diggs, and they've gotten rid of Micah Hyde, and they've been really trying to retool, and I think doing a smart thing in trying to not just go all in and tank your team's future by, just trying to send everything for this next year or two, but try to keep the window open for as long as possible. It's what the Chiefs did, and it's worked out very well. Everyone's like, why are you trading Tyreek Hill? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Well, they built Patrick Mahomes a pretty nice defense, and it's worked out for them greatly, and I think the Bills are trying to do a similar thing, but in order to do that, you need to get cheaper, you need picks, you need players, and the Bills are able to do that, and I still think we're able to get their guy, as in the 2nd round, they get Keon Coleman. I thought this was going to be Adonai Mitchell, but Mitchell seemed to fall, and he was not really on the radar as much as we may have thought he'd be, but I thought if it was not Mitchell, it was going to be Keon Coleman, and it was, and I think getting him in the 2nd round and the 1st pick, very solid for me. I don't have any complaints with that, and this was a team that obviously needed a receiver desperately, so I have really no issues with this pick. Now, I do think overall they could have done a bit more in this draft at the receiver position. They had 10 draft picks, picked 1 receiver, and you are looking at Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, and Curtis Samuel as your 3 receivers. I would assume number 4 is going to be Matt Collins, which obviously does not strike fear into you, but I do think it's unfair to just grade that as the receiving core because you have to add Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. I think you're going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets, obviously. And when you have on the field, what I assume going to be, Knox, Kincaid, and then Coleman on the outside is going to be, I think, their primary number 1, and then Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir are going to be mixing in and out. I don't think it's as bad of a receiving core as everyone's making it out to be, but I do think they could have done maybe a bit more in this draft, maybe put another draft pick into, a receiver. And I don't want to just bring up could have picked this guy, could have picked that guy, but I mean Malik Washington in the 5th round, or Javon Baker in the 4th, or whoever the pick may be. I think there was a lot of opportunities to have another receiver be picked, but I'm not going to knock them too hard because you got Keon Coleman, you got a lot of quantity of players. So we go into the 2nd round, Cole Bishop. I think that's a perfectly fine pick and a perfectly understandable pick. You're looking at their safeties now with no Micah Hyde, and it's Taylor Rapp, Mike Edwards, and Cole Bishop. I presume Cole Bishop's going to get plenty of play time early on in his rookie season. 3rd round, late 3rd round, you go with Dwayne Carter to be, part of the rotation. The Bills love having a deep rotation of interior defensive linemen, so no surprise to spend a 3rd round pick on one of those. Ray Davis was the pick in the 4th round, and I do think he is a very high floor player, solid backup. I don't think he'll ever be anything other than the backup, but that's all they're drafting him to be behind James Cook. So a perfectly solid pick there once again. But then we're going to get into a pick that I really, really like, and that is Cedric Van Pran out of Georgia. He was a guy that I very much liked a lot more than some of the other interior offensive linemen. To be very clear, I had Cedric Van Pran over Zach Frazier as a center prospect, which was obviously a very unpopular opinion. It's just I was very low on Zach Frazier, and I'm high on Cedric Van Pran as a really reliable, solid center. I don't know if he'll ever be like some top tier high end center, but I think he could be a really solid player, and I wouldn't be surprised if he gets early playing time. Their center right now is Connor McGovern, but I think Van Pran long term very much can be the center, and I wouldn't be surprised if even this year he is the guy going forward. So I absolutely love that pick, and I had, like a 3rd round grade on him, so getting him in the 5th round is more than great value. So I think that's the real steal of their draft of, they had 9 other picks outside of Keon Coleman, and while Cole Bishop was a solid pick and Carter is fine and Davis is a high floor backup, I think when you get into day 3 especially, Van Pran is the shining star of that day 3. And then as you dive into the rest of day 3, it's a lot of just, guys to fill out their roster, linebacker, edge, 2 tackles. We'll see if any of those tackles could eventually be their guy. They signed La'el Collins. They have Spencer Brown still, Deion Dawkins. You don't presume any of those tackles are going to see the field early on. They get Daquan Hardy in the 6th round, a team that I think did kind of whiff at cornerback a bit because I think Keir Elam was a very poor pick, and I had stated that on my Twitter beforehand that I thought Elam was a very, very poor 1st round pick, and I seem to be right about that one. But they have Teron Johnson still, Christian Benford, and Rasul Douglas. Not a strong unit, but we'll see if Hardy gets to fit in there a little bit. Just a lot of guys to fill out the defense and offensive line later on, but I don't have anything crazy to say about this draft in the sense that they got this insane player, blue chip prospect, and maybe you look at number 11 for not having a blue chip prospect that high, but in the previous video I did say good things about the Browns draft class as well for not having a 1st round pick. For me, it's what you do with what you have. They traded down a number of times, acquired a bunch of day 3 picks, still got Keon Coleman, and then snagged what I believe to be a starting center in the 5th round, a starting safety in the 2nd round, and a bunch of decent backups elsewhere. So overall, I think the Bills did a nice job retooling this offense, getting cheaper, getting younger, getting depth. I think it's a very solid draft class overall. And that will wrap things up for the AFC East. Let me know what you think, if you agree, disagree, what you thought of their draft classes as we continue on in the draft class evaluation. This is number 2 of 8, and I will see you all in the next episode.